Walter, I wanted to get back to you about the president and his general attitude, not just about the markets. Somebody must win, somebody must lose. If things are going badly, I must fire the Fed chairman, even if I can't fire the Fed chairman. But Matt Lewis had this great column on Christmas, and he talked about how Trump's worldview was so different from evangelicals' worldview. He said Trump came from, he had this theory of scarcity. I win, you lose. Which an ungracious viewpoint, which means if a refugee comes into the United States and they can save their children, then that must mean we're losing. Well, that's his attitude on foreign policy when he talks about suckers. He says the United States, we're suckers because we're actually helping other countries. He can't look past the fact that, yes, we're helping other countries, but actually we're helping ourselves even more. Not just because of who we are, but again, for economic reasons.
I think you've put your finger on the most essential quality about Trump, is that he's the type of person who says that in order for me to win, others have to lose. He can't find the win-win situation. He doesn't have the empathy or sort of the feelings for other people to say, let's figure out how we can make it work. That's bad internationally, economically. Because in order to win against China, you do not want to hurt the Chinese economy. Otherwise, soybean exporters here in Louisiana are going to go down to zero soybean exports. Likewise, when you're dealing with Congress and you want better border security, you have to say, how do we make it a win-win for both? That is not, it seems to me, in his DNA. He's a deeply unkind person who wants to make others feel like losers. And then you get to our allies in Europe. He's saying, well, we don't want to be suckers. No. The NATO alliance was a win-win for the past 60 years. So I think he's got to get a mindset in which he says, I don't have to destroy other people in order for me to succeed. And you're not seeing that in trade. You're not seeing that in foreign policy. You're not seeing that when it comes to the economy or to domestic things like immigration.
Well, and Walter, you talk about the president being a deeply unkind person. It also just means he's a terrible deal maker, and how ironic that this is a guy that wrote The Art of the Deal. Anybody that's ever run a mediation, which I have, anybody that's ever been in a mediation knows, your goal is to have everybody leave, not happy with what they have, but at least feeling like they won. That's always my goal. Whenever I've gone into any negotiation, I talk to the people around me that say, we're going to go and we're going to give them hell. I said, no. Figure out, what do they want? When we leave the office, why are they going to think, boy, we got the best of them? That's how you negotiate. And yet, it's just not in Donald Trump's psyche at all. And talk about, again, go back to NATO. Talk about all the other treaties that we've signed in the past. It always, we wanted to be a win-win, just so, again, we're not day traders, but we're in it for the long run with these diplomatic alliances.
And I think it has to be ingrained in a personality that you don't want to see people be forced to admit that they're losers. You want to see people who say, I like dealing with this country. I can trust this country. The country doesn't lie. The country is honest. You can count on this country's commitments. We're going to find something where we consider it a win-win. And even if you're successful in a negotiation and the other side is unsuccessful on a trade deal or whatever, you don't need to force that country to be called a loser. I just think that this is a deep-seated thing in the personality of Donald Trump. And if you do read Art of the Deal, you know it's about humiliating other people, not making long-term alliances.
Which is why Bob Woodward, Donald Trump, could never get a bank to allow him to borrow money, why people stopped doing deals with him in New York City, because they knew they couldn't do deals with him. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with Rudy Giuliani before he jumped on the Trump train, when he was still a Trump skeptic in early 2016. He said, "I never met anybody like Donald before. Everybody else, when I go into rooms and we're negotiating deals, everybody leaves saying, okay, you get this, I get that, and we try to figure out how everybody leaves happy." He said Donald Trump, and he told me this early 2016, the only person he's ever met where when he goes into negotiate a deal, he has to leave feeling like he won and the other side lost.
Yeah, and this is an important point, and there's a subsidiary point to the one Walter is making. I always think these things hinge on specifics, and the first 3 weeks of the Trump administration, so it's February 8th, 2017, he has a dinner at the White House with Mattis, the new Secretary of Defense. Mattis is going to Europe to meet with NATO, and, you know, what's the policy? And Trump, of course, is saying, oh, NATO, we're spending all of this money. It's, in a way, for Trump, these things are about cash flow. And Mattis finally says to him, no, Mr. President, if NATO didn't exist, we would have to invent it. And as long as NATO exists, there's no way Russia can win a war in Europe and Asia. And Trump finally says to him, okay, Jim Mattis, you go talk to NATO about this, but you are going to have to be the rent collector. Now, for Trump, this is about money, and there's a long-term agreement the members of NATO have that every member will contribute at least 2% of their GDP to defense, but by the year 2024. So he sends the Secretary of Defense off to try to get more money from these countries when it's not yet 2024, and puts Mattis in this box. And so he kind of goes there and he says, okay, everyone needs to chip in more money. Well, these relationships are not about cash flow. Right. But Trump brings that mentality from New York real estate. And, you know, this is one of the other boxes we're in.
And I think that what Bob Woodward, Joe, is making is an incredibly important point, because the president would probably not like this characterization because of his success in business, but he is at heart a small business person. He has always competed against bigger companies. In hotels, he's competed against Marriott and Hyatt and these other ones. In casinos, against the major casino players. He's a small family-run operation. And so to Bob's point, every small business owner thinks about one thing: cash flow. You need positive cash flow, and it's really interesting to hear that kind of diagnosis about the way that he operates. I think it's extremely apt and important in calculating how he may negotiate deals, because what he's looking for from the Federal Reserve is cash flow. He wants lower interest rates. That's why he goes after the Federal Reserve Chairman. He thinks that way in a balance sheet, and as you know, Joe, better than anybody, politics is not a balance sheet. It's not a dual entry ledger. Yeah. There's not assets and liabilities matching up.
No, there's not. And also, it just shows a complete ignorance on his part on how NATO works. That, as Bob Woodward said, the goal is not 2% by 2018. And also, Donald Trump shows every day when he talks about this that he's ignorant. He believes that there is a gigantic pot of money at NATO headquarters that leprechauns guard, and that Germany will come and write a $200 billion check and give it to the leprechaun, who will put it into this giant pot at NATO headquarters. That does not exist. Again, the goal is 2% of their own defense budget, as Bob said, in 2024. We'll continue talking about this and much more. We've got Bob Woodward, Walter Isaacson, Yamiche Alcindor, and also Richard Haas. We'll be right back. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.